Montana Territory, August 1883. The sun was already high over the Bitterroot Range when Jonah McAllister saw the girl collapse in the dust just beyond his south fence line. He dropped the fence post he was carrying and ran. She was rail-thin, red dust caked on her cheeks, and her dress hung off her shoulders like it belonged to someone twice her size. Her eyes blinked open when he knelt beside her. "You alone?" Jonah asked, his voice low. She nodded. Her lips were cracked, bleeding. "I walked." "From Willow Creek?" "That's 30 miles, Jonah muttered, stunned. He glanced around but saw no horse, no wagon, no bags. She tried to sit up. "Please, I just need water." Jonah hooked an arm under her back and lifted her carefully. "I got you." He carried her past the barn, up the slope to his cabin. The porch boards creaked under his boots. Inside, he laid her gently on the settee near the fireplace. She was barely 18 by the look of her, but something in her eyes was older, like she had seen too much too young. He poured her a tin cup of water and held it out. She drank it fast, coughed, then drank again slower. "Thank you. What's your name?" he asked. "Abilene," she whispered. "Abilene Foster." Jonah crouched beside her, arms braced on his knees. "You got people?" Her eyes went flat. "No," he waited, but she turned her face toward the wall, exhausted. Jonah stood, ran a hand down his mouth. He had not planned on company. He lived quiet, just him and his land, but he was not about to put her back out in the wild. She stayed 2 nights before she spoke more than 5 words again. On the 3rd morning, she stood barefoot on his porch, wrapping the worn shawl he had given her tighter around her shoulders. The wind tugged at her dark hair and her eyes found the horizon. "I can work," she said, not turning. "I clean, I cook, I will earn my keep." Jonah leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "No one said you had to. I do not want charity." "I never offered it." She looked at him then. That was the first time he saw the real her, something hard beneath all that hurt, something sharp and stubborn. She helped him mend fences that day, her fingers scraped and bleeding from the wire. She did not complain. That night, she cooked beans and cornbread without asking where he kept anything. It was not long before the whispers started in town. Jonah rode into Thompson's Supply one afternoon, and old Clara behind the counter narrowed her eyes. "She still at your place?" she asked, sharp. Jonah paused, setting a sack of flour down. "You mean Abilene? They say she is trouble, that she ran from somewhere, maybe a brothel." "Maybe worse." Jonah's jaw tensed. "They say a lot of things." "She's a burden, Jonah. You do not owe her anything." He picked up his sack. "No, but I gave my word." That was the end of it. He did not tell Abilene what they said. He did not need to. She already knew. One evening, after supper, she sat on the porch steps, arms around her knees. The sky was turning pink and gold behind the hills. Jonah came out, leaned against the post near her. "You all right?" She nodded, then after a long pause said, "I was working for a family near Willow Creek. The man." He tried to. She stopped, swallowed hard. "His wife called me a liar, said I was a curse, said I seduced him." Jonah's hands curled into fists at his sides. "I ran," she finished. "I have nowhere else to go." "You are safe here," Jonah said quietly. She looked up at him. "Why are you being kind to me?" He met her eyes. "Because you deserve it." Her eyes filled, but she looked away fast. It took weeks, but the fear in her face faded. She started humming while she folded laundry. She laughed once when the goat got into the feed bin, and Jonah nearly dropped his hammer just hearing it. He started finding excuses to be near her. A broken hinge on the washroom door. The garden rose needing checking. They worked together side by side, and something unspoken grew between them, slow and steady, like roots under the earth. One night she stitched a tear in his shirt by lamplight. He watched her hands move, her face calm and focused. "You are not a burden," he said suddenly. She looked up, startled. "You are the best thing that has happened to me in a long time." Her lips parted. Her eyes searched his face. Then softly she said, "You are the only person who has ever said that to me." He reached out, took her hand in his. Her fingers trembled, but she did not pull away. "Abilene," he said, voice low, "you are not just someone I helped. You are someone I care about, deep." She stared at him, heart in her throat. Then, like it cost her everything, she said, "I care about you too." They stood in silence, fingers laced, hearts pounding. That night, Jonah could not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the girl in the next room who smiled now when she stirred the stew pot, who had survived things no one should have to, and how she had become the center of everything without even meaning to. He had taken her in because it was the right thing to do. Now he could not imagine life without her. He did not just want to protect her, he wanted a life with her, and there was no going back. The first time Abilene stepped into Jonah's hayfield alone, she wore his old hat, brim wilted from years of sun, and breathed like she hadn't in months deep and full. The grass came to her knees, gold and rustling, and the sky above was a blank, bright blue. She rolled her sleeves and started cutting nettle from the fence-line, quiet and steady. Jonah watched from the rise above the barn, leaning on a rail with his hat low over his brow. He didn't call out, just watched her move with a purpose she hadn't had when she arrived. That evening, when she brought in a full bundle of greens for drying, Jonah took it from her arms and said nothing. Instead, he set it on the table and fetched a basin so she could wash her hands first, the water sloshing gently as she scrubbed the dirt from her palms. She glanced at him, uncertain. "You didn't need to," she said. "You did the work." He dried her hands with a cloth, careful and slow. Later, while she shelled beans, he patched a tear in the harness leather. The only sounds were the clink of beans in the bowl and the faint call of a whippoorwill near the tree line. The lantern between them flickered low, painting soft shadows across her cheek. She didn't speak until the bowl was nearly full. "Have you always lived alone?" she asked. He paused, needle mid-stitch. "Since my brother passed," her eyes shifted to him. "Was he older?" "By 2 years. We built this place together. He caught fever 4 winters back, nothing the doc could do." She didn't say sorry, just nodded the way someone does when they understand there's no fixing a thing. "You ever think about leaving here?" she asked after a while. "Going somewhere new," Jonah looked around the cabin. "This land's been good to me. I know every tree, every creek bend, don't see the need to start over." She rested her hands in her lap. "I used to think if I kept moving, I'd outrun what happened. But it just follows." "You're not running now," he said. "No," she whispered. "I'm not." The next morning, she was up before him, kneeling in the garden rows, pulling weeds with her fingers still stiff from sleep. Sunlight caught the curve of her neck, and for a moment, Jonah just stood in the doorway, letting the quiet fill him. He brought her coffee, black and bitter, and they drank it on the porch with their knees touching. Abilene turned her cup in her hands. "Last night I dreamt I was back in that house near Willow Creek. But this time," I told her, I told her what he did. Jonah didn't interrupt. She didn't believe me, again, but it didn't matter. I wasn't scared this time. He reached over and brushed a bit of dirt from her sleeve. "You don't have to carry that alone. I know, I don't want to forget who I was before." "You're stronger than you were before," he said. "Maybe, but I want to be more than just someone who survived." Jonah turned to her then, his face unreadable. "You already are." That afternoon, a letter arrived by courier, Jonah's name inked in a tight, sharp script. He opened it at the table while Abilene hung laundry out back. He read it twice. Then he folded it and set it down. When she came inside, her hands smelling of soap and sun, he met her eyes. "I need to go to Bozeman next week. Sheriff there's asking me to testify on a land dispute. Old neighbors trying to push a widow off her property." "You going?" I said I would. Abilene nodded slowly. "You'll be gone long, 4 days, maybe 5. I'll keep things running here." Jonah hesitated. "You don't have to stay if you don't want." She looked at him, steady and sure. "I want to." That night they shared stew and bread by lamplight, and she told him about the time she caught a snapping turtle with a string and a nail bent into a hook. She laughed at the memory, and Jonah laughed too, the sound deep and warm. Her face lit in a way he hadn't seen before. When the fire burned low and their bowls were empty, she reached across the table, touched his hand just once, fingers light and certain. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. He turned his palm upward and held hers gently. "Neither am I." They didn't speak after that, just sat there, hands joined, while the wind moved soft through the cracks in the cabin walls and the world outside quieted into night. Jonah left for Bozeman before daylight, saddle cinched tight and coat buttoned against the chill that still clung to the August mornings. Abilene stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, watching the dark shape of him ride west down the trail until the trees swallowed him whole. The cabin felt different without him, not empty, but waiting. She kept to a rhythm. Water hauled from the creek by sunrise. Eggs gathered before the hens got restless. She patched a tear in the bed, ticking, and threshed the last of the rye, her hands steady with the sickle. Midday on the third day, a rider came up the slope. She watched him from the barn, hand near the shovel handle, until she saw the red kerchief around his throat. Elijah Whitaker, Jonah's nearest neighbor, 3 miles east, the only soul Jonah ever visited regular besides the smith. "Miss Foster," he said, tipping his hat, "just checking all's well while Jonah's off." She nodded. "Everything's fine." He shifted in the saddle. "Saw coyote tracks near my hens yesterday. Figured I'd mention it. Appreciate it." He hesitated. "You know, folks talk." But Jonah never cared for the talking. He listens to what's real. She didn't answer, just brushed hay off her apron. "Truth is," Elijah added, lowering his voice, "he's steadier since you came. Doesn't ride out to the far ridge looking for work that doesn't need doing." That night, Abilene lingered by the hearth after supper, mending a pair of Jonah's socks by lamplight. The silence stretched long, the fire cracking soft. She caught herself watching the door more than once. On the 5th morning, the sound of hooves woke her before dawn. She stepped outside barefoot, the ground cold under her soles, and saw him leading the gelding by the reins. His coat was dusty, his jaw dark with stubble. He looked up, and his face changed when he saw her. "You're early," she said. "Didn't want to stay longer than I had to." She took the reins from him without asking and led the horse to the trough. He followed, quiet. "They get the land back?" she asked. He nodded. The widow had papers. Just needed someone to read 'em out loud in a room full of men who wouldn't look her in the eye. She handed him the brush and watched his fingers move through the gelding's mane. "You look tired," she said. "Didn't sleep much. Too used to your coffee." She blinked at that, unsure how to answer. He met her eyes, and she felt something shift between them, like the last piece of fence rail settling into place. They went inside, and she poured him a cup while he leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He didn't speak until she set the tin down in front of him. "I saw a preacher while I was in town." She turned halfway, a towel in her hand. "You go to church now?" "No, but I asked him something." She waited. "I asked what it takes to make a marriage legal out here. He said 2 adults and a witness. Said he'd sign a paper if we brought it to him." Her hands stilled. "You don't have to answer now," he said, "but I'd like to build a life with you, not just share chores and coffee." She walked over slow, drying her hands on her apron, and looked up at him. "I never thought I'd want that again," she said. "Not after everything." "I'm not everything," he said, "just me." She touched his collar, the fabric creased and worn. "I know who you are." He covered her hand with his. "I don't need a paper to know I belong here," she said. "But I'll sign it if you want. I want it for you, for us." She nodded, eyes shining, and leaned against him, her head resting just beneath his chin. He wrapped his arms around her, slow and certain, like he meant to hold her there for the rest of their days. Outside, the wind picked up, stirring the trees, and the sun crested the hilltop, casting gold light across the pasture. He kissed her forehead, then her mouth once, gently, like a promise. They stood that way for a long time, while the fire burned low behind them and the day stretched wide ahead, full of things they'd build together. The morning after Jonah asked her to marry him, Abilene climbed the ridge behind the barn for the first time. The air up there carried the scent of pine and crushed sage, and the valley below looked like something remembered from dream, dusted in amber light, quiet as a prayer. She stayed there long enough for her dress hem to dry from the dew, thinking about the way his voice had sounded when he said, "Just me." When she came back down, Jonah was oiling the hinges on the smokehouse door. He glanced up as she approached, but didn't speak. She handed him a folded scrap of paper. "You'll need to write it back to Bozeman. That preacher said he'd sign it, but I figured I'd write my full name down. I want it right on the record." He tucked it into his vest pocket without opening it. "I'll take it first thing tomorrow." She nodded, then crouched to stack the kindlings she'd brought down from the ridge. "You ever think about building a second room off the cabin? Only if you'd be sleeping in it with me." Her hands stilled for a beat, then she kept stacking. I was thinking we could use the old lumber under the lean-to. It's dry and it's not doing much good where it is. Then that's what we'll use. They didn't speak after that, both working in companionable rhythm, the day unfolding like a clean page. Later that week, Jonah returned with the marriage document signed and sealed. They didn't call anyone out for a gathering. No cake, no ribbons. Just Elijah Whittaker standing on their porch with a Bible and a pinched smile, and the two of them holding hands while the wind stirred the cottonwoods. When Elijah rode off, Jonah turned to her. "You sure you're all right with it being just us? I don't want a room full of people remembering me for who I used to be." He kissed her hand, rough fingers brushing her knuckles. "They'll remember you for what you build from here on." That night, she moved her things from the side room into his. He'd cleared the dresser without her asking, left her the top drawer and the middle one. She folded her belongings slow, touching each piece like it needed blessing. He stood by the window, boots off, eyes on the pasture. "You ever think about children?" she asked, voice low, his fingers curled around the windowsill. "Sometimes, but I figured it wasn't something I'd have." She crossed the room, laid a hand on his back. "It's not something I've let myself picture either, but I could, with you." He turned, and something in his face softened like frost giving way to spring. They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to, days stretched long and full. She started keeping a small journal by the hearth, noting planting times, weather patterns, and where the quail nested near the fence posts. He gave her a whittling knife with an antler handle, and she carved a spoon with her initials on the back. One evening, just before frost came down from the peaks, Abilene brought him a wrapped bundle tied with twine. "I stitched this from your old shirts," she said. "Thought maybe when winter sets in, we'd want something warmer on the bed." He opened it and found a quilt, thick and uneven, the squares rough but carefully placed. He ran his hand across it, then looked at her. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything." They sat on the porch, the quilt across their knees, watching the sun dip behind the ridge. A fox crossed the far edge of the pasture, lean and quick, and neither of them moved. "I want to be the kind of woman who's remembered for her steadiness," she said after a while, "not the kind who ran." "You already are," he said. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You make it easy to stay put." He wrapped his arm around her. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Abilene." She didn't answer right away. Then, quiet as dusk settling over the hills, she said, "And you're the only thing that ever felt like home." They watched the sky darken, the stars coming in one by one, and the cabin behind them stood warm and lit, filled with the life they were making steady, honest, and entirely their own. By mid-October, the frost crept down from the high country and settled each morning on the porch railings and fence posts in delicate white breath. Abilene began waking earlier, lighting the stove before first light to warm the cabin, her fingers quick to the flint. Jonah often rose to find her already dressed, a shawl tight around her shoulders, humming under her breath as she stirred the porridge. He built the second room she'd once spoken of, not as a separate space, but as a proper addition to the cabin, a place for a cradle, maybe, or shelves for the books she'd started collecting. She read by lantern in the evenings now, her lips moving silently over lines of scripture or essays stitched into the back of the farmer's almanac. "You ever think about teaching?" Jonah asked one night, watching her eyes move across the page. She looked up. "I never got past the sixth reader. There's a schoolhouse starting up in town. They're looking for someone who can read and stay put." She set the book aside. "I've never taught anyone. You taught me how to make soap that doesn't smell like lye. That was survival." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Maybe it's time for more than survival." She didn't answer right away, but her gaze softened and she reached across the space between them to touch his wrist. "I'll think on it." Winter came with snow in early November, thick and quiet. They kept to each other more, the world outside wrapped in stillness. Jonah fitted new glass into the south-facing window, and Abilene lined the sill with dried lavender and sage bundles, their scent rising when the fire warmed the room. One afternoon, as she swept ash from the hearth, he came in with a parcel wrapped in oilcloth, his coat and shoulders dusted white. "Wasn't expecting you back from town so soon," she said, brushing her hands on her apron. "Didn't take long." "I had a list." He handed her the package and tugged off his gloves. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a length of blue calico, rich and fine. She held it up, fingers trembling slightly at the softness. "Thought you might want to make something for yourself," he said. She swallowed. "It's too nice for the barn." "It's not for the barn." She folded it carefully, laying it on the table like something sacred. "You ever think about what your brother would say if he saw all this?" Jonah glanced toward the window, the glass fogging from the stove's heat. "He'd say I finally stopped trying to do everything alone." She crossed to him, taking his hand. "You don't have to anymore." By December, she began writing letters to the school board, her pen slow but steady. She didn't tell Jonah what she said in them, only that she thought it was time to contribute more than she had. The mornings grew darker, and the nights longer. He built her a sled from spare lumber, and she used it to haul firewood from the back grove through the snow. He carved her initials into the handle and never mentioned it afterward. One night, while they watched snow fall heavy and silent, she turned to him, her voice hushed. "Would you be content if it was just us?" Jonah didn't look away from the window. "I'd be content with you in any shape this life gives." She rested her head on his shoulder. "That's what I needed to know." Near the year's end, word came from town. The teaching position was hers if she wanted it come spring. She accepted without hesitation, and Jonah was the first to sign the paper with her at the post office, his name firm and proud beside hers. They celebrated with coffee boiled twice and the last of the blackberry preserves, spread thin on cornbread. On the first day of the new year, Abilene stood at the top of the hill behind the barn, the same place she'd gone the morning after their vows. Jonah joined her gloved hand, finding hers without a word. "You think this land ever gets tired of the cold?" she asked, eyes scanning the horizon. He squeezed her hand. "I think it rests, same as we do, waits for spring like it's waiting for a promise." She leaned into him, cheek against his coat. "Then let's keep the promise." They walked back to the cabin, footsteps side by side in the snow, smoke curling from the chimney, warm light spilling through the thick glass. Years passed gently. Abilene took to teaching like she had always meant to, her voice calm and sure as she taught the children their letters and numbers, her hands quick with chalk and patience. Jonah repaired wagons and fences for neighbors who asked nothing in return but a split of coffee and a place at the fire. They never built anything grand, but what they had was lasting. A home not just made of logs and stone, but of steadiness and earned affection. Of quiet mornings and long evenings, of shared burdens and small joys. In time, they added a cradle to the second room, then another. The house never grew large, but it never needed to, and in the quiet years that followed, neither of them ever ran again. They had already arrived.